means that the number one pick in the 2021 NBA draft goes to the Detroit Pistons.
Who's got the number one pick in this year's draft? Who's got the number one pick in this year's draft?
Basketball!
Select Isaiah Stewart.
The Detroit Pistons select Killian Hayes.
Saddiq, that was absolutely sensational.
I don't know what went into that process. I met the criteria to be selected, but I wasn't.
From long range. Oh! Yes!
Detroit basketball!
Pistons fans, welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast, part of the Believe Network. I'm your host, Mike Anguilano, back off my brief hiatus, joined by my co-host, Aaron Johnson. Aaron, how are you doing, buddy? I haven't been on the pod lately due to some life stuff, but really happy to be back.
Very, very happy to have you back, Mike. I'm doing well. I'm doing great because the crew, the Palace of Pistons crew, is getting together at Little Caesars Arena for the Cavs Pistons game. It's going to be great. So excited to see all the boys. It's going to be a fun experience. We got some Pistons stuff to talk about today, but before the game, so I'm ready to get into it.
Yes, let's get right into it. And yes, it'll be the first time we're making, for the very first time. We've been podcasting for almost 9 years. No, like 7 years.
I was thinking seven.
7 years, almost a decade. And have not actually met you in real life. Or any of the other Palace of Pistons people. Well, we're going to rectify that. So while all of you listeners are listening to this pod, the day that drops, which would be Friday, November 4th, we'll be going down to Little Caesars Arena and finally meeting the Palace of Pistons crew after all these years of writing and podcasting and John in the group chat. We're going to actually make this happen. So very cool. Cavs and Pistons. And let's get right into it to talk about the Pistons, because there's been some stuff happening for Detroit. First off, got to talk about Bojan Bogdanovic's extension. But before we get into that, I wanted to thank our sponsor for this week, and that is BetOnline. And basketball is back, and BetOnline remains your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season. You'll always find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends at BetOnline. And as your continued source for all sports wagering information, BetOnline features live betting, free contests, and giveaways all season long. Always the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports and events, whether that's the NFL, NBA, NHL, MMA, tennis, boxing, or even golf. Head on over to betonline.ag to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Again, betonline.ag, 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit if you use promo code BLEAV, BLEAV, to receive your reward. So again, betonline.ag, use the promo code BLEAV, BLEAV, receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, let's go ahead and get into some Pistons talk. Has been a little bit of an interesting time for the Pistons. We've seen some of the early parts of the season. I've been watching from afar, trying to keep up with both them and the Cleveland Cavaliers. So Bojan Bogdanovic signed an extension, a 2-year extension worth $39.1 million. The team confirmed that on Monday. So Aaron, you know, we talked about Bogdanovic. That may have been the last podcast I did, is when the Pistons traded for him. Bogdanovic sticks with Detroit. We talked about having a lot of money available next offseason, what they could do with it. Signing him was always on the table, I think, because wings are so important, and this team was just such a poor shooting team last year. You need a wing that can come in and shoot. You know, what do you make of the extension for Detroit?
I really like the decision. I think it was important to bring back Bogdanovic to extend him. You know, I know there was a lot of discussion when the Pistons originally made the move to trade for Bogdanovic. A lot of people were talking about, you know, this is a great move for Detroit because it gives them a guy to play around with. but it's also a guy that they should then be able to flip at the deadline to a team that's a bit more desperate and is willing to give up a young asset, whether it be a pick or a young player, a prospect of some sorts. And I was really hoping that would not be the case. I think the Pistons are at a point where they need to start putting together some pieces that are actually going to be here for when they take that leap. And I think Bogdanovic is a guy that can still be here when the Pistons are ready to make the playoffs, hopefully sometime sooner rather than later. He's playing phenomenal basketball. I mean, 22 points a game, 50% from the 3-point line on over 7 attempts per game. Obviously, he's not a great rebounder. He's not a great defender. And the Pistons aren't currently necessarily built to really cover up some of those shortcomings in his game, because that's a problem with his co-wing and Saddiq Bey, who kind of shares some of those same deficiencies, and playing with an undersized center in Isaiah Stewart, who is still trying to figure things out on the offensive side of the floor, really doesn't help it either in terms of masking his deficiencies. But Bogdanovic, what he brings to this team, is one of the few veterans on this roster, a guy that can give you 30 minutes a game. He's going to space the floor for you. You can turn to him, and he's going to get you a couple buckets a night where, on that certain possession, you would not have scored if he weren't out there. And the money is fine. The money's perfectly okay. The cap is going to continue to rise. With the new deal coming, I think people need to understand that, certainly when they take a look at the contract. But the other thing is, his contract in the second year is non-guaranteed. The trigger date is in July, so the Pistons have until July of that offseason going into the final year of the deal, so the 2024-2025 season, to determine if Bogdanovic is worth the money to keep him. Otherwise, they're going to cut the ties with him. And I believe the number reported to be guaranteed was only $2 or $3 million. So if you have to cut ties with him before the 2024-2025 season, for whatever reason, you're really not losing that much money to get him under control now, for a guy whose game that I certainly feel is built to last as he ages. I mean, what he does now is what he should be able to do 2-3 years from now. He shoots the ball. He puts it on the floor a little bit. He's not a super athletic driver, but he's crafty enough to get some shots to fall inside. And then, he gets to the line a little bit here and there. So I think what he does for this team certainly warranted the money. He's a good veteran piece to have. He has winning experience. And as this team starts to get better, Bogdanovic is certainly going to be part of that and be playing a role on this team moving forward. So very much for the decision to bring him back. I'm very glad it wasn't a move just to then try to flip him for a young prospect or another draft pick. I've grown very, very weary of that whole ideology as the time has gone on. At some point, you have to start pushing some of your chips to the table and trying to assemble a team full of good, competent players. Bogdanovic is certainly one of those guys. It's a home run move by Troy Weaver and the Pistons.
Yeah, I remember talking on the podcast about pushing your chips in and cashing in on a player who could help you win some basketball games. And they only gave up Kelly Olynyk and Saban Lee, correct?
Yeah, they gave up nothing for him.
Yeah, they really gave up nothing for him. It is a $2 million guarantee in that final year. So, if he hits a wall at age 30, I think it'll be 35. If he hits a wall at age 35 and you're like, yeah, we can't have him on the roster anymore. The shot's not there, whatever. Then they can, just get rid of him. And the encumbrance is half of what I think they're paying DeAndre Jordan right now to play basketball for a different team. So it's a good deal. He's a good shooter. You need a veteran to kind of glue everybody together. We've talked about this before. We thought it was Jeremy Graham. It doesn't have the same skill set that Bogdanovic has. Bogdanovic is, quite literally a two-way wing, where Jeremy Grant wanted to ISO as much as he could. So you replaced a veteran wing in Grant with another veteran wing in Bogdanovic. And like you said, the stats are there. I mean, he is a potent three-point shooter. He spaces out this offense, which did not have much spacing. But he's a guy that as the we saw a report from Zach Lowe about Marvin Bagley getting healthy, and that Marvin Bagley is going to start when he's healthy, and that might put Bogdanovic back on the bench. And this kind of leads into our second topic, which is the return of Nerlens Noel, kind of mucking up the rotation. But let's start with the wing rotation first. If Bagley comes back, are you going to start him at the 4 and then put Bogdanovic back on the bench? You're going to put Bogey at the 3 and put Saddiq Bey on the bench? What are your thoughts on that? Because I've got some thoughts on that too, but I want to hear what you have first.
I'm going to imagine we're on the same page here. I think, dating back to when Zach Lowe kind of brought up this discussion that apparently was happening internally with Detroit, or maybe others around the league were discussing it. I don't see how you could possibly even consider starting Marvin Bagley over Bogdanovic. Now, I do think, and this is where I wish Jasper was here this week to talk about this, because he's been on this train for a minute now. I think there is some merit to bringing Saddiq Bey off the bench. I think you look at the second unit, and they are in desperate need of a scoring punch. We don't know when Alec Burks is going to be back. He's supposedly limited in practice right now, but Dwayne Casey's given no sort of timetable on when he will be able to return. And who knows what type of player he's going to be when he returns. Marvin Bagley is going to provide an offensive punch just in terms of his ability to play the pick and roll, to finish around the rim. But he presents his own issues for the team on the defensive side of the floor. And that's part of the reason why you would take Saddiq Bey out of the starting lineup, is because he's not helping this team defensively, and he's not helping this team on the glass. That's where, and I'm sure Jasper would be saying the same thing, if I'm making a change to the starting lineup, and I'm taking Saddiq Bey out of it, I'm not taking Bojan Bogdanovic out of it, it would be to move someone like an Isaiah Livers into the starting lineup. Give them a more consistent spot-up shooting threat who's going to contribute defensively more and is a capable rebounder for his size. I'm not looking at Marvin Bagley to be the solution. I think Marvin Bagley is going to play a role for the team off the bench. I think he's a guy that, if he's playing well that night, you can ride the hot hand with him over someone like Isaiah Stewart potentially. But for the Pistons, as they've talked about trying to, potentially go with Isaiah Stewart at the 4 in lineups, I don't think that's alongside Marvin Bagley. I think that has to be alongside someone like a Jalen Duren or a Nerlens Noel, who you're comfortable with defensively protecting the rim. I think Bagley, again, is just more suited for that bench big role, being a scoring threat. And obviously, as the Pistons kind of seemingly are getting away from these all bench lineups, even though they went to it a little bit in the game Wednesday night against the Bucks, I think that will help sort of mask Marvin Bagley's defensive issues. But then again, you roll out Saddiq Bey, Marvin Bagley, a rookie in Jalen Duren, in an all bench unit, and you're asking for trouble. You're asking for really the same issues that starting group is having with Bey, Bogdanovic, and Stewart, where there's just not enough defensive abilities there. But I think Bagley coming back certainly helps this team. I don't know how much it does, because I think some people are sort of overvaluing Bagley in a sense. He's not a floor spacer. He's not shotting the ball well from beyond the arc, even though he's attempted 3-point shots. He's so bad defensively. He just doesn't have great IQ. He doesn't play with a great motor on that side of the court. So he's just very, very limited there, and that limits the Pistons. So I think they're kind of in a position where if they have to make a move, they have to make some changes to the lineup. It probably is something like Livers for Bagley until they grow comfortable with Jalen Duren. And I don't know if that happens this year to really the extent that they want to start him. but it's a murky situation for Detroit where you just look at the roster and you're like, this roster is missing some key components, and there's too many players that have similar deficiencies that play similar positions to make up for one another.
I think the real crux of the problem is that the Pistons are going to start Marvin Bagley. I mean, that's kind of the long and short of why.
Right, but they can't start Marvin Bagley is what I'm saying. There's no roster.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
Configuration on this team that would support Bagley starting. Not with Bogdanovic on the court, not with Ivy on the court. There's too many guys that aren't good enough defenders to mask what he's going to do. And I mean, we have the film. He wasn't a good defender in Sacramento, and he was just as bad in Detroit. We kind of know what he is in that regard. So there's just not a lineup configuration on this team as we currently stand that would support Bagley starting. It just doesn't make sense.
It's just a really weird thing for Zach Lowe to say that, oh yeah, and once he's healthy, they're going to plug him in at the 4. Doesn't really make sense to me. If you want scoring punch on the bench, you can get it in Marvin Bagley. You don't need to put him into the starting lineup and make your defense that much worse. Just seems really strange. So if you do, let's just say that, the Pistons are going to start. They're going to say, yep, we want to put Marvin Bagley in the starting lineup because that's what we want to do. Then what does your rotation look like? Do you bench Saddiq Bey? Do you bench Bogdanovic? Do you, what is the plan there for you?
I'd say if the Pistons were, for whatever reason, so determined to start Marvin Bagley, Saddiq Bey would have to be the guy to go to the bench. Unless they're willing to play Bagley at the 5. And I don't think they're really willing to do that.
No.
I don't think so. You have Nerlens Noel, who's now back in the fold. So I think you would have to send Saddiq Bey to the bench because if you're looking at the way things have gone this year, Bey has been best in terms of scoring, attacking the rim. He's completely flipped in that regard, where for the first 2 years, he was a outside shooter. And this year, the three-point shot hasn't been there completely, and he's been actually rather good when he attacks inside, drawing fouls, finishing against contact, making the right decision with the ball. But if you bring in Bagley, who again doesn't space the floor, is a play finisher down low, you don't necessarily need another guy trying to get to the rim. You already have that with Cade and Ivy getting downhill, and then you have Stewart and you have Bagley who play down low primarily. So you'd have to have shooting out there. And I say that lightly because there'd just be no shooting out there outside of Bogdanovic. So I hope that's not the case. I hope the Pistons have kind of looked at what's happened, looked at what's transpired this year, seen how Bogdanovic has played. I'll be honest, I've never really bought into the idea that Bogdanovic was going to come off the bench. He's just been too good of a player as a starter for too long. I mean, this guy hasn't come off the bench in a game since 2016, and he came off the bench one time with Brooklyn, and then he was coming off the bench for the back end of the year with Washington. But since 2017, 2018, he's not come off the bench in any game he's played in. This is a starting caliber player. He's a 22 point per game scorer for you right now. There's just not a world where you're bringing him off the bench for Marvin Bagley. But if for whatever reason they were so headstrong on it, that's how I would approach it. Saddiq Bey would be the sacrificial lamb in that regard. But I still wouldn't do that if I was Detroit. I just don't think it's a smart decision whatsoever.
You're right. It's not a smart decision, and I don't know why that was reported as being the case. Speaking of guys that are vets and back and healthy and might be messing up the rotation, Nerlens Noel and Alec Burks. We've talked about Burks a little bit in our group chat about how the second unit would benefit dramatically from his scoring punch. So let's start with the guards and that rotation. Alec Burks is coming back. I mean, we don't know exactly when, but seems to be ramping up. I think there was a tweet from Mike Curtis today that he's continuing to do one-on-one activities, and one would imagine that he's going to be back sooner rather than later, and barring any dramatic setback. What does the guard rotation look like with Burks back in? Who is out of the rotation at this point or having their minutes dropped?
He essentially needs to absorb every single Killian Hayes minute from the beginning. Honestly, I mean, Killian Hayes has just been so bad this year, shooting 17% from the field. The playmaking, with the turnovers does not correlate strongly. He unfortunately has just not taken the necessary steps to continue to deserve consistent minutes at the NBA level. Alec Burks immediately day one that he's healthy should get all of his minutes. You need shooting, you need scoring, and you just need a guy that you can kind of depend on a little. And teams don't really have to defend Killian Hayes. And because of that, the Pistons are hurting when they're not having Cade or Ivy in. And you're already trying to facilitate, developing a rookie guard in Ivy. And obviously Cade didn't start the year off super strong as he was trying to find his footing. So you can't have two guys that are still developing, are still kind of molding into themselves, and then turn to another guy who's doing that at an even worse extent in Killian Hayes. He's trying to learn how to play the game, it seems like. Trying to figure out where to dribble the ball. And that, to me, as soon as Alec Burks is healthy, has to be the move. Because, you're playing Hamidou Diallo right now, who I don't necessarily love that he's getting minutes, but he's giving you better minutes than Killian Hayes. And
he's averaging 13 minutes per game. So is Corey Joseph.
And Corey Joseph has really fallen out of the rotation now. I mean, he played a little bit against Milwaukee on Wednesday, but he didn't play against Milwaukee in the first game on Monday night. And he was a second half addition to the rotation on Wednesday. So he's not really in the rotation right now. I think Burks has to come back, take all the Killian minutes, get another guy out there that can handle, shoot, score, be a threat on that side of the floor, and go from there. I think until you see him come back, and even, Marvin Bagley to an extent as well, this bench is just destined to struggle. They don't have enough guys that can score the basketball. Duren is a rookie. He just takes time. He's not a polished player on that side of the court. Nerlens Noel is a defensive-minded backup big. He's not a threat on that side of the court.
Right.
Isaiah Livers, is good defensively, can shoot the ball. He's not a guy that's going to go out there and create offense, create shots. Hamidou Diallo,
he's very reliant on other people.
Exactly. Right. And Hamidou Diallo is a guy that will try to create offense, and most of the time it ends up as a turnover. So this second group is just so limited. They need a guard that can kind of, be an offensive hub. And when you get that in Burks,
needs to orchestrate some things.
Yeah. And I get that Killian Hayes can make the ball a little bit, but he can do that, but he's so limited as a scorer that teams are able to play off of him more, and they can, they don't have to worry about him being a scoring threat. So getting Burks, getting Bagley back will certainly be a stabilizing force to the second unit.
There's only one player averaging, or I'm sorry, that has a lower points per shot attempt than Killian Hayes on the roster. The fact that he's not the lowest is bad.
I'm willing to
Kevin, I already said it, but it is Kevin Knox at 43.8.
That was, I guess.
Killian Hayes is at 49, which is in the 0th percentile for his position. So
yeah, I'm pretty speechless about it too. I didn't think in years we'd be having this discussion. I mean, Mike, I talked about Killian Hayes like he was the second coming of prime Goran Dragic, prime Ricky Rubio, like has a little bit of James Harden in him. Like I talked about him like that. I mean, look at what he is in year 3. I didn't think we.
I mean,
discussion.
we talked about making sure that people talk themselves off the ledge, because point guards take an extra long time to develop. It's just how it is. They take a long time to develop, usually. Yeah, I mean, you might get your Ja Morant type guy who's just an athletic freak and doesn't have to rely on being, a super potent passer or a perfect 3-point shooter, where anything like that. But that's rare. Most of the time, point guards take a long time to develop. We're seeing regression, though.
No,
It's exponentially worse. I mean, his points per shot attempt last year was 93, which is in the 12th percentile, which is trash. That was marked improvement from his first year. Now that 93 is like cut in half. It's worse. His turnover rate has increased. His turnover percentage is at 17%. That's higher than last year. He's obviously averaging far fewer minutes. So to have a higher turnover rate with fewer minutes per game is really bad.
And the hope was that some of the pressure was going to be off his hands this year, because he wasn't going to be starting. He was going to be playing in the second unit. And I hate that we're piling on this guy right now, but it's just a matter of fact at this point. Like, he's been the worst, or one of the absolute worst, everyday rotation players in the league this year. He just has. And I don't want to be having this discussion, but that's the matter, like, right now. And
well, it factors into our discussion of Alec Burks is going to come back. You're right. He needs the Killian Hayes minutes. Unfortunately, the second unit just can't operate without somebody to facilitate and have the threat of scoring the basketball. Jalen Duren, like you said, very reliant on other guys to score. Isaiah Livers, very reliant on other guys to score. Hamidou Diallo needs to be more reliant on other people to score, because he's wants to isolate and handle the ball. Everyone else is just, they're in the starting lineup, or they're able to create for themselves. I know that they want to try to stagger Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham, and that's probably the best way to go. So, maybe Jaden Ivey is one of those guys that is playing with reserves a little bit more often to get, some of the pressure off of Cade. And Jaden Ivey can go and create his own shot or get to the rim. He's very downhill oriented. But the fact of the matter is Killian Hayes is just flat out killing you offensively, and he's not good enough defensively to make up for that offensive loss. It's just how it is, and it's the sad reality. And I don't know what you do to energize his offensive game. He scored 24 points in a preseason game, and I thought, he's here. He figured it out. He solved the problem of not knowing what he's doing when he gets into the paint. That problem is evidently not solved yet. So, yeah, I agree with you. Burks has to take over those minutes. And what about the big? So with Nerlens Noel, I think he's probably trade bait, because Jalen Duren's been pretty darn good. Being so young, he's been pretty impactful already. Nerlens Noel coming back, does that shake up the big rotation for you in any way, or are you pretty much sticking with healthy scratch, CDMP for Nerlens Noel from here on out?
It's tough, because I think Noel gives you some good things. I think his ability to kind of anchor a second unit's defense, be a rebounding presence, I think that's important. But you can't deny minutes to Jalen Duren. And if the Pistons aren't willing to use Stewart more as a four with those two in the fold, it's very difficult to see a path where all three of them can get minutes every night. It would just be quite odd. I don't know how it would work unless, Stewart goes down to playing, 5 to 8 less minutes, and Noel and Duren kind of split them. I just don't know how it works. It's, you try running 11 deep if you're playing a third center every night. It gets a lot more difficult to do. So unless they're willing to play Stewart at the 4 more and try him in some 2 big lineups, I think Noel is going to be the sacrificial lamb in that case. I think you have to play Duren. He's a part of your core moving forward. He needs the minutes on the court. And I think Noel obviously, can be flipped if that's deemed necessary at the trade deadline. So I think Noel, if you're only playing two of Stewart, Duren, Noel, I think Noel's the kind of the odd man out. But I do think he provides some nice things for you as well. So I'd be looking to say, look, we got to figure out if Stewart can play the 4, because what we're doing right now is not working. We're 2-7. We got to start trying some different things. And I think that's a way to do it. It might not work, but you got to give it a chance, right? You talked about it all off season. You made the decision to trade assets to acquire Jalen Duren, knowing you just drafted Isaiah Stewart a few years ago. You spent all off season saying, look, Stewart's going to be able to play the 4. That's part of how we want to build this team. So you got to start practicing that and seeing if it works. So we'll see. I mean, it sounds like Duren's going to be back in the fold come this weekend. If not, maybe just a few days later than that, some point next week at the minimum. We'll see what the Pistons plan is. I hope they at least try it out a little bit. I think it's worthwhile because I think Noel provides you something on a nightly basis.
Oh, he's definitely a rotation level player for sure. The problem for him is that you've got guys above him that you kind of need to figure out what you have. You mentioned Isaiah Stewart. You need to figure out if he's a 5 or a 4. He's taken 38% of his shots are threes. Last year was 9%. He's making an attempt to do something different, to be a 4. He's hitting 26% of his threes, but he is attempting to make, some sort of change by being a 3-point shooter, by being a stretchy 4. Whether that happens or not, hard to say. He's trying right now. So far, results are not quite there, but Isaiah Stewart does provide stuff for you, like you said, a night in, a night out basis. Nerlens Noel does too. And then with Jalen Duren, he's playing well enough that, I kind of thought he'd be a little bit unseasoned coming into the season just because he was maybe the youngest player in the NBA. And a lot of times it takes some time in the G League for some of those super young guys to come in and make an immediate impact. But he's making an immediate impact, rebounding the basketball, being able to finish down low. Obviously he does all of his damage in the paint. He's too good to not play for right now. So it's unfortunate for Noel that he's kind of stuck in this position of, a healthy scratch. But it's an okay position to be in if you're the Detroit Pistons. But it is tough. It is, I do feel for him, but you acquired Duren. You want to see the different combinations of players that you could put together that make sense. Bagley's coming back too. Didn't even talk about Marvin Bagley. That's the guy you just signed. You got to see what he's able to provide, if anything, on the offensive side of the basketball. We already know what it's going to be defensively. So, no, it's tough. I don't know. I don't know if they play him a little bit more to see if they could try to trade Noel. Kind of like how we thought about Bogdanovic, but he's a big that has a role as a backup center on a playoff team.
Right,
might have some other opportunities elsewhere.
Right, Noel is a guy that belongs in a rotation. If it's for a team that's losing a lot of games right now and has a couple bigs already on the roster trying to develop, I don't know, but somewhere he has a rotation. A spot in rotation. So it just comes down to if Detroit's going to try to make it work with some different guys out there and trying some different lineup configurations, or if they don't want to try that and are going to end up moving them.
Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me on that. But again, you got to see what you have out of your young guys and move on from there. It'd be really helpful if the younger guys were playing better. Looking at you, Killian Hayes, make these decisions a lot easier, but unfortunately, not always the case.
Yeah, I think
Aaron, Yeah. Anything else you want to touch on before we wrap up this edition of Palace Pistons Podcast?
No, honestly, I'm just kind of counting down the hours until Friday night. I'm so excited to see all the Palace Pistons guys there, and it's going to be a fun night for sure. And I'm excited to watch the Cavs too. I mean, you know how in I've been on Donovan Mitchell since he was a prospect coming out of Louisville. But I mean, I was talking about it, this past offseason when he was available. I was saying Detroit should try to put together whatever package possible outside of Cade Cunningham to go get him. I really wish they would have, because he's just a phenomenal player. Cleveland is a contending team. Darius Garland is awesome. Evan Mobley is a phenomenal young prospect. Jarrett Allen's good. Like, they're just such a good team. And now that they have Donovan Mitchell, I can't even hide it anymore. Like, I am just a pseudo Cavs fan at this point, which is just a terrible thing to say. As a local Detroit resident, but it just kind of is what it is. They have so many fun, good players, and they are going to be good for a very, very long time.
In a league of increasingly unlikable teams and players,
right?
The Suns, and as of today, the San Antonio Spurs, and the Brooklyn Nets are the most unlikable team. Like, the Lakers are climbing the likable scale every day, which is really,
for me,
not something that happens.
I don't know if I'll ever be a Lakers guy with it's just not a great group over there either. Yeah, but you're right. The point stands. A lot of unlikable.
Russ is doing fine coming off the bench. He's playing a lot better. I like Darvin Ham. That place still has a ton of problems, but they're climbing the likability scale because everyone else around them is just falling off of a cliff. Suns and Spurs, and
you want to jolt up the likability scale, you just go out there and you sign Mitch McGary. You get him in your then you're top of Aaron's likability scale.
That's climbing
likability scale.
You want to fall down, you sign Steve Blake to anything.
Seriously, you bring him in as a consultant, as a coach, anything. I wish death on your franchise.
Disaster just incoming. Well, now that we've wound in the Mitch McGary reference to this podcast, we can officially bring it to a close. I want to thank our sponsor, BetOnline, for once again sponsoring this edition of the podcast. And if you have forgotten from earlier in the show, head on over to betonline.ag, receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit using promo code BLEAV. That's BLEAV. We'd really appreciate it. Helps support us and helps support Believe, who's been nice enough to let us do this show for now over a year on their podcast network. So for my co-host, Aaron Johnson, I am Mike Anguilano. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, part of the Believe Network. And we will see you all next